There you are. If that was you, unless I promoted. Oh, Zach.
Hello.
There we go.
Yay.
Yay.
All right. Fantastic. All right, here we go. So let's get ourselves kicked off. So I'm so excited about this webinar. So before we begin, what we usually like to do, and I'll do this while we're doing an introduction because we're running a couple minutes late, but what we like to do is start off by asking the audience a quick question. So what I want to do is launch a quick poll and ask, what kind of PR pro are you? Are you a agency person? Are you in-house? Are you freelance? Wow, I'm watching those numbers change in real time, and that is so cool. We have so far, wow, there's a lot of in-house people here. There's per second for people to miss, 80%, 81%. This is, wow, this is wild. This is real-time data capturing right here. We're at, I'm gonna close it. I'm gonna give everyone about 10 more seconds. Is it? 4, 3, 2, 1, ending the poll. Very cool. So I'm going to share the results if you can see those also. It looks like we have mostly in-house people.
Yeah.
Really exciting. Feel free to type in the chat also where you work and share a little bit more about yourself. And let's get a little bit started. I'm going to introduce the webinar right. So on the, where'd that go? So on the heels of releasing our Q2 Media Barometer, today what we're going to talk about is a very relevant topic, the framework of a perfect pitch in 2022, which based on the data is more important than ever to help professionals across the globe strategize for their businesses and clients to have the best year yet. So by way of introduction, my name is Aaron Friedman. I'm a seasoned marketing veteran with years of experience in digital marketing, agencies, and in-house. And I'm so excited to introduce two people joining us today that could not be more qualified to discuss this topic, as they're both seasoned PR professionals, both started successful PR agencies, have spent a career mastering the art while understanding the science behind how to masterfully perfect it. So first we have Gini Dietrich. So I'll be honest, I don't even know where to start with Gini. She's been a role model for me throughout my entire career. She knows that. She's the founder and CEO of CEO and author of Spin Sucks, host of their podcast, and wrote a book titled Spin Sucks. She's the creator of the Peso model and has crafted a certification for it in partnership with Syracuse University. She's run and grown an agency for the past 15 years. She's the co-author of Marketing in the Round, co-host of Inside PR, and co-host of the Agency Leadership Podcast. And she's a dear friend. Welcome, Gini.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's like how I get to see you. So there you go.
I know. And also a man who needs no introduction, our fearless leader, Zach Cutler. Zach is a comms veteran, data enthusiast, serial entrepreneur, and angel investor. He founded Propel after running his own New York-based communications firm, Cutler, one of the top tech-focused agencies in New York, and was agency of record in the US for 70 startups, 5 of which went on to become decacorns, 15 went on to become unicorns, and many additional that IPO'd or were acquired in the hundreds of millions. He ran Cutler for 9 years and identified a need for innovation within the industry and sold the agency in order to pursue Propel and his dream of moving the industry forward, and was named by Forbes as one of the 20 entrepreneurs shaking up the New York tech scene. So welcome, both of you. So excited about this. So before we begin, just a little bit about Propel. Well, this is the agenda. We're gonna go over a quick introduction. We're gonna talk about journalist engagement with PR pros in 2022, elements of a perfect pitch strategy, treating PR like a science, PR industry predictions versus reality, and an open Q&A. And at any point, if you do have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that we get to them during the Q&A section. So just a little bit about Propel. Propel was founded in 2019 on a mission to democratize and make PR technology accessible for the masses. Propel is reimagining earned media and have launched many first-of-a-kind features, including the industry's only native Gmail and Outlook email pitch plugins. Our platform helps marketing and communications professionals connect with journalists and influencers, earn media coverage, and measure impact. We're headquartered in Tel Aviv with teams based across the globe in New York, London, Miami, and we even have a team driving around in the US in an RV. Propel has over 150 customers, including Real Chemistry, Textron, Insurify, and other leading brands and agencies. So enough about me, enough about the host, the panelists. Now on to the real topic. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to Zach, who's going to dive into the data a little bit more. Take it away, Zach.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. And thanks, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Ginny. Really excited about this webinar. I think my camera just got turned off. Let me. All right. So we're going to look at some interesting data today about journalist engagement with PR pros in 2022. We're going to look at the updated average response rate that PR professionals are getting from journalists to their PR pitches. We're going to look at that data for Q1 of this year. So if we go to the next slide. So we're seeing some interesting things. And Ginny, I'm really interested to hear your feedback on this. So a trend that's been happening for a while and that we've seen very clearly between 2021 and 2022 throughout each quarter of 2021, and then also looking at Q1 of this year versus Q1 of that year, a significant and steady decrease in the average response rate that PR professionals are getting from journalists. So we can see that it went down from 3.95%, the average response rate in Q1 of last year, to only 3.37% in Q1 of this year. Now, it might not sound like crazy different numbers, but if you think about it, it's actually about a 15% decrease. And we see this quarter after quarter after quarter, year after year after year. And it's kind of concerning because I feel like if this just keeps happening, like, are we eventually going to get to, 1%?
Zero.
So I wanted to ask you, Ginny, do you think PR pitches are becoming less effective? Do you think that, the amount of outlets proliferating is leading to this? Do you think, it's spray and pray? What are the factors that you think are contributing to this?
One of the things that when I was looking at this ahead of our time together that really struck me is if this were lead generation or email marketing or conversion rate optimization, we would have to change the strategy, because to see a drop like this in results is astonishing. And yet we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. So I went through the SpinSucks inbox to see what kinds of pitches we've gotten in the last week. There were 26 pitches to have guests on the SpinSucks podcast. We don't have guests on the SpinSucks podcast and never have. So, and I always love that it always makes me want to respond when I get this, because people will be like, I just listened to the last 5 episodes of your podcast and I loved what you talked about with such and such guests. And they'll name people. And I'm like, that's not true. We've never had a guest and you're making this up. And so I think that's number one, is irrelevance. I also looked and we saw things like in the last week, we've had Mother's Day pitches. We've had NFT pitches. I actually just got one for an attorney that has worked with Apple and is looking for brand awareness, media relations. Sure. And we also have had some on Chicago entrepreneurs. So they sort of got that right because we're in Chicago, but still not something that we cover. So I think it's a couple of things. I think one, we're spraying and praying, and that's not effective. 2, we're not paying attention to the data, which is telling us the way we're doing it is not working. And 3, we're just not relevant. I'm not going to respond to your email, no matter how compelling it is, if it's not relevant to me. And I'm one person. Imagine, if I'm up at the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and I'm getting 5,500 pitches a day, I'm not going to respond because they're just not relevant.
Yeah, I love what you said about, if a percentage decrease this significant in any other area of a business, it would be like an enormous red flag. It would be
Huge.
like
Yes.
bringing the big guns to solve this immediately.
Right.
And yeah, when it comes to media relations, the industry just keeps seeing the average response rate fall constantly, quarter after quarter. And yeah, I remember when I had my agency, we had certain people that, we interviewed that really sprayed and prayed. We didn't hire those people, but there's a lot of people in the industry that unfortunately are sending out pitches to irrelevant journalists and
Right.
publications. We're saying, Ginny, and even if they're not spraying and praying, even if they're sending it to 10 people, but 9 of those are not truly relevant, then I feel like it spams the inboxes of the journalists. You would know better than me. And then, like, how can a journalist navigate through that? And how can they respond to, many of those pitches? So seems like a systemic problem that just keeps getting worse. But the good news is there are ways to improve this. There are ways
Yes.
to take control and to, make the numbers better. And that's what we're dedicated to at Propel. And we've done a lot of research as to, what makes for a really effective pitch. So if we go to the next slide, there's a few elements that we discovered, and they're interesting. So the first element on the next slide is the subject line. So what we saw was that subject lines with 1 to 5 words got the highest response rate, almost a little over 5.5% response rate. And when the subject line went up to 16 words or above, the response rate tanked all the way down below 2%, like 1.87%. That means that literally it's a 3 times better response rate for pitches that are between 1 to 5 words than pitches above 16 words. That is kind of shocking to me. I mean, everyone knows, like, you're not supposed to write a really long subject line, but the fact that it could be a 3 times worse response rate, what do you make of that, Ginny?
I mean, first of all, I don't even think that I'm trying to think what the word/character count is for subject lines in most email platforms. 16 words is really long. It probably is getting cut off.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, start there. But there are professionals out there in this world called email marketers who have studied this to death, and they know what works and they know how to make it work. So study the best practices for email marketing and use that. I mean, that's what you're doing. Your email if you're sending emails, you're marketing via email to a journalist, a blogger, influencer, or a podcaster, right? So I would absolutely spend the time, and email marketers know exactly that 3 to 5 word, something that's really interesting or motivating, that's going to get them to open it. That's the magic sauce. And there's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of content out there written about how to do that really short subject line that's going to get it opened.
And as the owner and editor of Spin Sucks, which is a really successful PR publication, what subject lines do you typically open, or what resonates with you, and what do you try to avoid or not open?
I look for things that are going to be, it's the relevance for us. So I look for things so if it says Chicago entrepreneur, blah, 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 I'm not going to open that. If it says NFTs, I'm not going to open that. If it says, things that are just not relevant, or guest for your podcast, not opening it, because we don't have guests on the podcast. So I will not open those kinds of things. What I'm going to look for is relevance and whether or not I see the whole subject line in my reading pane.
Which is a good segue into the next data point that we looked at, which is the pitch body length. So
Yes.
similar, Yeah.
Yes.
Surprise, big surprise that the highest response rate comes from the shortest pitches. So pitches with 1,000 words long.
It's an article. It's not an email.
Exactly. Had a response rate of only 1.46%. And, we saw in one of the previous slides that the average response rate was closer to 4%. So this is a really, really bad response rate. Obviously, no one wants to receive an essay, but any thoughts on this, Gini?
Yeah, I think if you can do a couple of things, just get to the point really fast, 2 to 4 sentences long, and include a link or two that's going to give some additional information. We had a pitch that we sent out to a couple of journalists granted, we have an Olympian that we're working with, so that's a little bit easier. So you can say Olympic gold medalist Benita Fitzgerald Mosley, blah, 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 and it gets response, right? So if you don't have an Olympian on your team who's amazing, I will say that we're lucky from that perspective, but just, 2 to 4 sentences is all you need, because what you're really trying to do is just garner their attention and get them to respond. And then you can give them more information. It may be more information via email. It may be more information via Zoom call or via phone call. But the idea of your first email pitch is to garner that interest and make sure that they are responding. That's all you have to do. 2 to 4 sentences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like it's also psychology. You want to give someone a taste. You want to hook them in.
Sure.
You want them to be hungry for a little bit more. You don't want to give them everything in the first email before they even showed you any interest in it.
Correct.
So
right.
Definitely applies this kind of standard sales principles related to that. If we go to the next slide, we took a look at embedding links into the pitch. And this was interesting. PR pros sent most pitches with 4+ embedded links. So almost 2/3, 64% of pitches had 4+ links. Now, what we saw was that pitches with only 2 to 3 links actually had the highest response rate. Do you think that journalists are getting link fatigue?
Yeah, honestly, truly, I think part of it is that a lot of organizations now have robots set up to scan their emails. And with more than, they're going to scan it with 2 to 3 embedded links anyway. But if it's 4 or more, it's probably being sent to spam, because it's so many that the robots are like, nope. So you have to be really careful and understand that many organizations are using these tools and software to sort of clean out their email to make sure they're not getting hacked and it's not spammed and all those kinds of things. And you're just being lumped into that with all of those links. So I would do 1 or 2 links. I wouldn't do more than that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And would you advise PR professionals to focus those links on any specific things? Like, what would you want to see in those links?
I think it depends. If it's somebody if you're pitching a person and it's not somebody who's well known, you might want to link to their LinkedIn profile or to the about us page on the website or something like that, just to give them a little taste of who they are. Or it could be a blog post or some additional content that you've written that supports the pitch, but I wouldn't do anything more than that.
Yeah, I feel like, when you mix in too many links, even if it didn't get caught by the spam filter, it's almost distracting, and it gives the journalists like too many options. It reminds me from a general marketing perspective about like not having too many call to action buttons, on a page.
You should have one call to action. One.
Exactly. Got to focus it in.
Right.
Not put the attention in too many places.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide. So we wanted to just take a minute to discuss why PR measurement is so important today. And obviously Propel is all about PR measurement. That's why we created Propel, to make PR more data driven and improve the workflow. But Ginny, I wanted to ask you if you could share a little bit more about what inspired you to create the PESO model, and how using data can make a strong difference in building content strategy.
The PESO model came out of this idea that, you know, we were solely doing reputation management, brand awareness, and events, and most of it was media relations. And we had these peaks and valleys, right? Like you would have this peak where you'd get the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch, and then you'd have this valley where you didn't have anything. And from an agency perspective, we found that clients got really frustrated by that. Like they were on a high and then they went on a low, and then they were on a high and then they went on a low. And when they're in the low, they start to look at how much they're spending on an agency, and they don't like it. So they forget, you know, it's like, it's kind of like you won't understand this, but it's kind of like having a baby. You go through this whole thing and it's painful and labor, it sucks and all of this. And then you have a baby and you're like, oh, this is amazing. I'm gonna do it again. And it's sort of that same kind of thing. You have these like emotional roller coaster feelings. And I hated that. I hated the constant, like, what's next? What do we have? What's in for me now? What do you have for us now? What's next? And, you know, even though we just got the front page of the Wall Street Journal and the front page of the LA Times, doesn't mean that we can continue to do that. So the genesis of the PESO model was really to help clients understand that there were things that we could do to keep the peaks high and not have such deep valleys. So using content, using social media, using some paid to boost and do some native advertising and things like that to help amplify some of the work that we're doing. And it certainly was not some strategic epiphany that I had one night and I was like, oh, this is amazing, we're gonna do that. It's kind of came out in pieces, and we started to look at how owned and earned media, so how content and media relations works together. And then we added in social to start to promote and distribute. And then we added in paid to amplify the work that we were doing. And what we discovered when we were doing that is it created this, when you integrate it like that, it creates this great big opportunity for building reputation, both online and off. It creates authority, it creates thought leadership, it does all these things, and it's measurable. And so, you know, in the past where we were looking at media impressions and advertising equivalencies, which, right now we can look at things like, are we actually generating leads, and what kind of attribution are we contributing to at first, middle, and last touch? And when we're doing organic and direct kinds of things with our work, how are we measuring that to an actual dollar amount? Now, not everybody, you know, some of you are educators, some of you work for nonprofits, so the dollar result is not as important to you, but think about things that you can do, like more volunteers, or raising more money, or getting more students in classes in your classroom, and things like that. You can actually measure the work that you're doing now in a way that makes sense to a business leader versus what makes sense to a communicator, which are not real metrics anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting, Ginny. And it's like hard to find people that are so passionate about PR measurement, and very refreshing. And I believe that there's so much opportunity in our industry that can be unlocked when I always say, you know, PR is always going to remain a creative discipline. It's about building those relationships with journalists. It's about coming up with those creative angles. But when you're able to marry that creativity with numbers and data, that's where the magic really happens. And
it really does. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just really refreshing to have you on the webinar, someone who's so passionate about this issue. And I think that's a good segue to our next slide. I'm going to pass it back to Aaron for another poll.
All right, yeah, and we thought that this would be a little bit fun, is to have a more of an interactive session about, or interactive discussion about 2022 PR, how they compare with predictions that we saw in December and January. We always see a lot of predictions early in the year, so we want to just compare some of the major predictions with what we've seen play out so far and what you should expect going forward. So I'm going to launch a poll. If everyone, I hope, can see it. Did that pop up on it? Yeah, there we go. So Is 2022 the year of embracing change, connecting our coverage with lead gen and sales, more investment in earned media, and restoring trust? And while everyone's answering that poll, Gini and Zach, what do you think these PR industry predictions, what do you think of these PR industry predictions is the biggest one that you've seen play out this year? Why not? Why do you think they're going to continue to be some of the biggest trends that we'll see in 2022?
I mean,
Yeah.
I believe that PR can be measured towards lead gen and sales, and I think that's one thing very important. But I think the most important of these four is restoring trust. We have to. I mean, that's one of the most important things we have to do, and we can do that as an industry. We can help media do that pretty effectively, I think.
Yeah, I have to agree. Connecting PR with lead gen and sales, and more broadly with business outcomes overall. That's one of the things that I was most passionate about in starting Propel was like, okay, great. So we're doing all these PR campaigns, but like, how's it actually affecting our clients' ROI? Like, why should they continue to invest in this and invest more in this? And clients were starting to get hungry for this data. Like,
right,
how is it actually affecting our business? And so, we built the first business outcomes dashboard with Google Analytics integration. And, you can actually now measure the direct attribution and the general correlation. So it's really about, connecting PR just like you would any other aspect of marketing to real effects on the business.
Yeah, I don't think we can get away much longer without doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see what everyone else voted. I just ended the poll. We had 69% people participated, and the jury says the two highest were embracing change and restoring trust.
Tied
Connecting
there.
PR, yeah, it was a little tight. And connecting PR coverage with lead gen and sales was only the second highest to more investment in earned media. Not by much.
I don't think anybody's investing more in earned media.
Right.
I have a prediction about prediction. I think in a year or two, number two will be a much higher percentage, because I think the industry is taking some time to really that mindset.
Yeah, and I think it's, if you're on the agency side, clients are getting pretty antsy. They want to see it. It certainly depends, of course, what kind of industry you're in, but I think executives are getting antsy for it. They don't. I cannot think of one single client that we've had in the last 3 years that is willing to invest in brand awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, we're going to move on now to the Q&A, but before we do, in case you've missed it, recently launched a new free version of Propel. So this includes a full suite of tools that can help you tremendously with your PR pitching. It includes research, pitching, and reporting tools. If you're already a customer, don't worry, because this is just going to give people a chance to explore the platform, try it out, try out some of the tools without any commitment. If you'd like to get pitching with some of our tools for free, all you do is make an account, and we'll share the link with you in the chat in just a moment, if not already.
And
now, go, please.
Just want to add one quick thing about freemium is that for us, it's more about it's more than just a product launch. It's really an exciting change for the industry, because one of the things we're most passionate about at Propel is making PR more accessible to anyone and lowering those barriers, and not having a super expensive platform that has pricing behind the curtain, that has, annual commitments, and, to really bring PR to the masses, and to enable anyone to do PR off the shelf. So this is an exciting milestone in our journey of making PR more accessible, and we hope you try it out.
That's exciting.
Very exciting. Definitely give it a shot. The link is in the chat, and if you need it, You can always message me afterwards, and I'm happy to send it over. Now, moving on to my favorite part of any webinar is the Q&A. So we've got some really interesting questions. There was a lot of discussion in the
It's a
chat.
lot of discussion.
little-
I couldn't eat yet.
There was a lot of discussion, and I was really trying to grab all those questions. If we missed it, I apologize, and we will definitely answer them offline later on in a blog post or at another time. So, oh great. So starting off with the first question, my clients are obsessed with ROI. Thoughts on how to demonstrate through media relations and media placement?
Yeah, so for me, this is piggybacking on the previous discussion we were just having, which is, to be able to understand how the PR campaigns you're doing are affecting, a few business outcomes. So it could be how it's affecting traffic, could be how it's affecting online purchases, white paper downloads, any form submission. And there's two key elements of this to kind of get the full picture. The first is the direct attribution. And there you're able to see like directly from the link backs or the backlinks in the articles that you're getting, how much traffic are those backlinks generating? How many goal completions or conversions are those backlinks generating? But we all know that that's like not the full picture, because so you might get a feature story in Forbes and maybe there wasn't a backlink, and the person who read the article Googled your brand later that day. That should still be attributed. And so therefore we also have general correlation. And so you're able to look at the overall traffic, the overall conversions on any given day or any given month, and you're able to see exactly in a simple visual way when the coverage of occurred. So you can make general correlations like, oh, that Forbes article was on April 15th, and we had a huge spike in traffic on April 15th.
Right.
And we didn't do another campaign that day. We can pretty much correlate that was the cause. So we have both of those in the Propel Business Outcomes dashboard. Whether you use Propel or you try to track business outcomes in a different way, I highly recommend it. I think clients really appreciate it, and I think that it helps also to refine, your PR strategy, because you can see sort of what's resonating and what's working.
So one of the things that we do is we look at, I mentioned this earlier, but we look at first, middle, and last touch attribution. And you definitely need software for this, and a data scientist doesn't hurt either, but you don't necessarily need the data scientist, but you definitely need software. So using Propel, you can look at first touch attribution. So exactly what Zach just explained. There's an article, your website traffic increases, you get more email addresses into your database, whatever happens to be. Sometimes that's as far as it goes. And Benjamin says here in the chat that, it's hard to directly correlate PR efforts to sales volume, which I agree with, because usually we're looking at first touch attribution. So what we look at is we say, okay, somebody came to the website for the very first time from a Forbes article, and we know that, we can track them through the process. And now, because we've been using a peso model, we're going to send them some content, and we're going to follow them on social, and we're going to do some retargeting with Facebook ads, and we're going to kind of approach it in a holistic matter, so that we can say, okay, now the second time they came for the first time from a Forbes article. The second, third, fourth, and fifth times they came, they read a couple of blog posts, they checked out our social, and they downloaded an ebook, and now we have their email address. And now we can say, okay, that's middle touch attribution, but they didn't necessarily come the second, third, fourth, and fifth time from the Forbes article. They came the first time. So that's first touch attribution. Now we know that the content, some of the marketing things that we're doing, that's middle touch. And then last touch, the 7th through 10th time they've come to the website, they may have looked at the pricing page, or they asked for a demo, or they went to contact us and filled out a form. Now that's last touch attribution. So you have this whole model that's working together, and you have to work with the marketing team to be able to do this. But we know that they would not have come to the website at all had it not been for that Forbes article. So we can make that correlation between the Forbes article and them becoming a customer at the end.
Awesome. There were a lot of questions that came in around pitching. So we'll start off with, what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of sending pitches through email versus social media?
Oh, don't do through social. I think every research on earth says don't do that. That journalists like to have, the quick conversations and to use it for research, but they don't love social media pitches. So I would not do. I think pretty much every research has said that.
Yeah, and Sadie, I would just add to that what we've seen from our conversation with thousands of PR professionals is that the overwhelming majority of pitches is done via email. Yeah, there's some people that pitch via social, there's some that pitch via phone, but the overwhelming majority of pitches are sent via email.
So here's an interesting one. Always use press releases after journalists agree to receive a pitch. What about attachments? Will they likely get flagged in your message as spam? Discussion of whether or not a link. There was a lot of discussion in the chat about whether or not sending links or sending attachments is preferable.
I
don't know what the research says, Zach, but
yeah,
I think attachments are bad.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So even when I had my agency before Propel, one of our cardinal rules was to not send attachments in any of our pitches because they can often get flagged, and they can get sent to spam filters. And nowadays, with all the different viruses that are sent via email and the bots and all that, nobody really wants to download a file from a stranger. So it's much better to, send a link or to put an image. If it's an image that you are going to attach, just put it in line in the email. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, for me, we have a rule here, and we extend it to our clients as well, that you should not open an attachment ever from somebody you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I personally know
there was
that have had their computers destroyed because of that. And
yeah, there was much that seemed to have been in the chat in the chat. Most people were actually saying that it's not a good idea and do not send attachments. So we're all in agreement on that one. Sounds like. So here's a question. How are you differentiating a pitch versus a release? So a lot of publications will share the entire release. This person says, I find a lot of publications will share the entire release, so I tend to include a full one.
Yeah, so I think, it depends on your style. Like we were talking about a little bit earlier in the webinar, the research shows that shorter pitches perform better. They get a higher response rate. So our recommendation would be to, not include an entire press release or a, multi-paragraph, very long pitch in your first email, but rather to, send a brief synopsis and pitch, kind of whet the appetite of the journalist. And then once they respond and engage and show that they're interested, then, give them the additional info. And and what we've found also, even in our own pitching that we do to journalists is, to say, hey, here's, Propel has raised some funding, or Propel is announcing this feature. And we just kind of tease it and we say, if you want more details, let us know. And that strategy performs really well. We usually get good responses to that.
Yeah, I find that strategy works really well too. And usually you may just get a 3-word response that says, please send release, which is great. Great. I will send the release. There you go.
Exactly.
So I want to jump into this one, which I think is a little bit more, conversational here. What do you think would be the worst? This could actually be a fun one. What do you think could be the worst mistake someone could make in a pitch? There's a lot of mistakes that people can make in a pitch. The worst.
I mean, I don't know if this is the worst.
Okay,
And I mentioned that
top 3 if you want.
Yeah, I mentioned this one earlier, but honestly and truly, the emails that I get, it makes me so angry when they're like, I just listened to the last 5 episodes of your podcast and I love it. And I love what so-and-so had to say. And I'm like, that's not my podcast. But it happens all the time, all the time. People do that all the time. Or I listened to the last 5 episodes of your podcast and I really love what you have to say. And I'd love to pitch so-and-so. And I'm like, you did not listen to the last 5 episodes of my podcast, or you would know that you should not send this pitch.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jenny. Like, I mean, I've written for Entrepreneur Magazine in the past and a couple other publications, and I used to get a lot of pitches, and like the ones that are irrelevant, so it's so irritating. It's like, I don't write about the weather. Like, why are you pitching me to write about the weather? I've never written about the weather. So yeah, it's all about like understanding what the journalist writes about and showing them that you've read their content. That I feel like that means a lot. I don't know how you feel about that, Ginny, but like if someone shows that like they read one of your recent articles and they really enjoyed it and they make a comment that shows you that like they really read it, and it's like, oh, this isn't a bot, this isn't a spray and pray, this person actually took the time and like enjoyed my content. Cool, maybe I'll respond to that.
Yes, with a caveat is that I think somebody somewhere said exactly that, like read the last thing they wrote and use that in your pitch, which is great if it's relevant to the pitch, but not great if it's not. And so sometimes people will say, oh, I just read your last blog post and I really liked it, and now I'm pitching you on NFTs. And I'm like, so yes, with the caveat. And one of the things, especially with our younger professionals, when they're coming up through the ranks, one of the things we coach them on is really digging deep. I mean, Bill says this in the chat, but really do your homework. And in some cases, you may have to go back 2 or 3 years to find the content that is relevant to what you're pitching. We do this a lot with sports clients. We'll say, hey, I know that you've been working on a story for the last 18 months on youth sports, and we'd like to include this in here. And they're really appreciative of that. But when you just say, hey, I just read your last blog post and I really liked it, that's different than actually making it relevant to your pitch.
Yeah, that's a great point. By the way, Sandra has a really interesting question.
Yeah, you got to answer that.
Yeah, how does Propel differ from Cision? And there's a few things, Amanda or Sandra. The biggest difference is that Propel is a PRM. That's the core of the platform. It's public relations management, which is essentially CRM for PR. And even though we have a media database and a media monitoring, the PRM is the core of the platform, and all of the insights that are gathered through the PRM, through the integrations we have with Gmail and Outlook, which are the only integrations in the industry, we're able to gather all these insights about the preferences of each journalist based on their real behavior in the past. When do they like to receive pitches? What day of the week? What time of the day? What topics? Also, how is your PR campaign actually affecting business outcomes? Because of the PRM and because everything's integrated from Gmail to the database to the monitoring, we're able to actually link it all together and say, hey, like this campaign led to this increase in traffic or led to this increase in purchases. And then also being able to build those relationships with the journalists by having one source of truth, where you can go in and you can understand every single pitch that any team member has ever sent that journalist, who on the team has the strongest relationship, when was the journalist last pitched, so you don't double pitch them. And then looking at each campaign and saying, how did we do on the launch campaign for this client versus how did we do on the product announcement for that client? What was our open rate? What was our response rate? What was our publish rate? And really making it a science and understanding what are the low performers? What are the high performers? How can we learn from what we're doing well and hone in on that and double down on that? And so that's the difference with Propel. It saves you a lot of time. It gives you new insights, gives you new reporting.
Carla also said, let's start with 15 grand. And you know what? I will add to that. Like, I am not a Cision fan. I look at companies differently today than I did even 5 years ago. And I look for things like diversity, equality, and inclusivity. And I am not impressed with Cision from that perspective at all.
Yeah, we've embraced a culture of diversity at Propel. I have a physical disability, and so it's an issue that's very passionate to my heart, and including people from all walks of life and having all kinds of different viewpoints. So we've actually established a diversity board at Propel, and we've done a few initiatives already. We launched the first accessibility feature in any PR software. So now you can access Propel if you are vision impaired, if you are dyslexic, if you have other sorts of issues with seeing or reading. We have an accessibility widget.
Love that.
And we also, what's that?
Love that.
Yeah, thanks. And we also did a big campaign to add diversity journalists into our database so that we have the most diverse database and equal access to stories and pitches. So an issue that we're quite passionate about.
It's important. It's really important. That's how people are going to make decisions these days. So it's super important.
Awesome. I think we have time for about one more question. So I'll end off on this. How much time would you recommend dedicating to, it's a little bit of a general question. How much time would you recommend dedicating to earned media or PR strategy and initiatives only compared to other types of content like owned and paid media?
Oof. I think it depends. I mean, it depends on what the goals are. It depends on what the campaign is. If you're doing a, product launch or a round of funding or, something like that, you're going to spend more time on paid than you are on earned than you are on the others. If you're doing something that, media is not really going to care about, like an ebook, then you're going to spend more time on owned. So I think it depends. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that.
What I'll add is that earned used to be sort of the little cousin of owned and paid, and earned has earned its rightful place as an equal. And it's really true, because if you think about it, like, people have learned to tune out ads. They're really sick of ads, and they're hungry for that trust and credibility that Jim was talking about earlier from the poll. And the only channel out of those three that builds that trust and credibility in the strongest way is earned, because it's third-party journalists and influencers and bloggers, writing about you and giving you credibility, which is so much more powerful than doing an ad or, writing about yourself on your own channels.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right, wait, actually, you know what? One more question. It's a really fast one. I think it'll be okay. So someone wrote, I always include interview op as the first two words in my pitches. What are your thoughts on this strategy, yay or nay?
I don't like it. You're
Why
using
is that?
you're using 2 words of your 5-word subject line. I'm telling you, study the email marketers and know what it is you should use. Interview op does not work.
Zach, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Ginny's right. Like, it's a very generic subject, and it's not to say it'll never work, but I think getting a little bit of specificity in there and standing out a little bit is the way that I would go.
Yep, totally agree.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much, Ginny, Zach. This was so much fun, such a great conversation. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions as a follow-up to this, or you want to learn more about Propel, or try our freemium, please, the link should be in the chat again, so you can click on that and check that out. Or if you do have any other follow-up questions, please reach out, and we're happy to help out and be in touch. And thanks again, and looking forward to joining you at our next webinars.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Ginny.
Yeah, of course.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Anytime. Bye-bye.